Hello and welcome to this primary election debate for Republican candidates from Arizona's Congressional District 1. This debate is sponsored by Clean Elections, the state's nonpartisan voter education agency. My name is Steve Goldstein and I'll be moderating. The format will probably be familiar to you, but the way we're sharing this debate is part of a brand new effort to support democracy in Arizona. Thanks to a partnership with the Clean Elections Commission and the Arizona Media Association, we're working to make sure these 2024 debates are the most accessible in Arizona history. That means this debate and dozens more between now and November will air on a long list of local TV stations, radio stations, and digital platforms, including support from local newspapers. It's a shared effort among hundreds of local media brands across Arizona. Transparency is critical here. That's why these debates have been designed with input from a broad group of journalists in Arizona representing urban and rural communities. And we've tried to keep the rules simple. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 1 minute for a closing statement. Candidates have drawn straws to determine the order. Throughout the debate, I will pose questions to each candidate, allow them to answer, and then make sure the other candidate has a chance to respond. Whenever a question is directed to a specific candidate, only that candidate's microphone will be open. At all other times, every microphone will be open. Thank you to voters across Arizona who have submitted questions for this debate. We have reviewed all of them to make sure every voice is heard. However, no candidates have been given advanced access to any of the questions. The incumbent, Congressman David Schweikert, has not accepted our invitation to participate in this debate. And with that, let's introduce our candidates for this debate, Robert Bakke and Kim George. Mr. Bakke, you have the first opening statement. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, the Clean Elections. Thank you, media partners. Thank you, Ms. George, for showing up and spending the time with us tonight. And mostly thank you, the viewers watching at home and on your mobile devices. This is an important election. Summer is here in Phoenix. We're going to have record heat potentially on Thursday. The sun is bright. Unfortunately, what's going on in Arizona is really not a bright future for the Arizona dream. Inflation is out of control. The economy is in chaos, and our border is being invaded by millions from over 160 different countries. We need change in Arizona. I'm Robert Bakke. I moved to Arizona 30 years ago. I've raised my kids here. My first place was in Scottsdale, and I now still live in Scottsdale. I decided to get into this race because after 14 years of watching David Schweikert talk and do nothing, we needed some change. We needed to get things done. David Schweikert claims to be a financial guru. Under his congressional leadership, the budget deficit has spiraled from $11 trillion to $34 trillion and growing. Our financial guru congressman has also pled guilty to 11 fraud violations, been censured by the House, and fined $170,000 plus paid over $1.7 million in legal fees. David's not here tonight. If you'll see, there's not a place for him up here. He declined to show up. That is David. He has not shown up. He's not accountable. He hasn't been in any of the debates that we've had or any of the meetings we had. In many ways, we should refer to David Schweikert as No-Show David. I'm a businessman. I have a proven track record. I can get things done. Tonight, we're going to talk about the issues. We'll have honest debate, honest conversation. My goal is by the time you come out of this conversation tonight, you know that I will fight for you and I will work to unite Arizona for a much brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bakke. Ms. George, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Clean Elections. It's an honor to be here. And thank you to the viewers that are watching. I look forward to telling you more about me, my campaign, and why I'm running to represent you in the United States Congress in the 1st Congressional District here in Arizona. My name is Kim George. I've got 23 years in federal law enforcement, investigating child sex trafficking, money laundering, organized crime, counter-espionage, and counter-proliferation matters, where foreign adversaries steal our technology and reverse engineer it to use it against us, our businesses, and the taxpayers. I also have 5 years in the corporate sector, working insider risk and global security matters for 2 different Fortune 500 companies. Our national security is in dire straits. I'm running because I'm the most qualified candidate for the times that we're in right now. Our borders are wide open. We've had more than 10 million people enter our country illegally under this administration. Just last month, over 3,500 Chinese nationals came into our country illegally. It's very concerning to me based on my background in law enforcement. Our economy, inflation, it's growing every day. the average citizen is having trouble making ends meet. And I'm sorry to say this, but our DOJ has been weaponized. What we saw in that New York courtroom last week was abhorrent. And if it can happen to a former president and a billionaire, it can happen to any of us. So we should be concerned. I've got the national security experience, the law enforcement experience, and the dedication to go to Washington tomorrow to jump in and to tackle the problems that we're having. I'm asking for your vote today. Go to KimGeorgeForArizona.com and find out how to get involved in my campaign and donate to help me get my message out. Thank you again. I look forward to telling you more about me and my campaign.
Thank you, Ms. George. Mr. Bakke, first question goes to you. You have 2 minutes to talk about it. Inflation has cooled from its highest levels, but it is still a problem, certainly in the Valley, in Arizona generally. What actions would you take as a member of Congress to try to make life more affordable for your constituents?
Yeah, that's a great question. Inflation's hit us everywhere. If we look at the price of eggs, or even if you go to Burger King or McDonald's, your burgers have almost doubled in price. Gas is up $1.50. The monetary policy set by the Fed, Congress doesn't have much of a play within that, but what we can do in Congress is we can focus on the things that will actually make a difference in inflation. Loosening regulation to allow people to build and grow their businesses and drive the economy so that people have more money in their pockets to spend during this time of inflation. We also need to drill, and we need to get gas down and more oil into this country. We are the leading oil producer in the world, but we need to be self-sufficient so that we can control our prices. OPEC has announced that they're going to hold or even reduce, which will raise gasoline prices. Our annual deficit right now is grown 170% over the last 4 years. We keep spending money like that. That's what drives up inflation. And with inflation driving up like that, that's driven up the debt and our annual deficit spending. As long as Congress keeps spending the money that we don't have, inflation will keep going up because we keep pumping that into the system. So to wrap up on this, what I would do is I would work to cut our spending in the federal government. I would loosen regulations and make it easier for you to earn more income to cover the costs that we've seen under the Biden administration.
Ms. George, your response on that?
Yeah, I agree with just about everything that Mr. Bakke said. Growth, we need more growth. Absolutely, we need to get inflation down, regulations down. I mean, all these things are common sense. It's funny to me that, here we are running for office for the first time, and the sitting congressman that's been there for 7 terms now has been ineffective. And as Mr. Bakke said, he's known as a financial genius and the financial guru in Washington, and yet here we are in dire straits when it comes to our economy and our inflation. Yes, absolutely, we need to get inflation down. We need growth, lower regulations. I mean, all those things to me are just common sense decisions. And finally, we need to start investing and spending more money in our country and stop sending it overseas.
Mr. Bakke, a follow-up when it comes to drilling a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, based on your opinion on that. Are there resources available, and do you try to balance environmental concerns that some people have on the middle and on the left when it comes to balancing out how much oil we may need with destroying some of our natural resources? Yeah,
that combines a couple different topics, one with the environment and what we do with our economy. Protecting the environment's important, and we need to make sure that we do the best to have a solid environment for the future. We also need to not jeopardize our future by switching everything to electric right now because our grid can't keep up with it, our power production can't keep up with it, the solar that we want to put in, the wind that we want to put in, we can't keep up with the demand. They talk about California. If California switched to all electric cars, the state would fail. The electric grid would fail, and they wouldn't be able to support the economy. So as we look at drilling and bringing more gas and oil to the market, we've got new technology in cars that increase the miles per gallon. They're more clean. They're cleaner than they've ever been. And there is a balance between the environment and the economy. I would say we need to make sure that we protect our environment, but we also need to put our people first because we need to grow our country.
Ms. George, I was thinking in terms of a lot of us who have spent time in CD1, maybe someone might mention the McDowell's and Warren Preserve. Mm-hmm. So environment is very important to a lot of people in this district. So I ask you a similar question. How do you find the balance between making sure that, in this case, we're energy independent in the U.S., but also we take care of some of the natural resources here?
Yeah, I think it's a good, healthy balance, right? We need to look at what's sustainable. We have Fossil fuels, God gave us this, natural resource under our feet. We need to use it. But I agree, we need to be better stewards of our environment, recycling, conservation. I mean, we need to do the best that we can to preserve our environment. But as Mr. Becky said, I owned an electric car in the past, and I did love my electric car, but it's too much on the grid. And to tell people that overnight we have to go fully electric, it's just not sustainable. We need a healthy combination of everything to make it work.
Ms. George, I will stick with you on this, and I will kind of make half a U-turn because I want to go back to a more general economic question. The stock market is doing mostly well, unemployment is low, and yet a lot of people are feeling like the economy is not good for them. How would you fix the economy in terms of, so we don't have this debate over whether the economy is good or not? Are there clear issues to you that would make it really beneficial for as many Americans as possible?
Yeah, again, I think it's funny. How do I fix the economy? I know it's a natural question that we have to answer, but again, I just would make common sense, practical decisions in Washington. The things that I would vote for would be for the betterment of the people and the constituents in Arizona and CD1. We need to keep our money here and stop sending it overseas. We need to invest in America. We need to invest in Arizona. So I would make common sense, practical decisions to help to better Arizonans.
Mr. Becky?
Yeah, if we talk about the unemployment being really low, the stock market being high, but when people go to the grocery store and they're, for what they bought for $100 4 years ago, they're now spending $150. That hits the pocketbook. I had a great conversation at a pickleball tournament back in December. National tournament, this guy Tom was from North Carolina. He runs a pet food treat company. I asked him how things were going, and what he said is happening in the economy. People are not buying less pet treats, but they've switched from name brands to generics because they need to save money. Look at pets. Right now, because of the economy, the impact and people's inability to afford their pets, the Humane Society has a 5-month wait to return pets. That gives you an indication what's going on. Credit card debt is at an all-time high. So while we talk about the stock market going gangbusters, people spending money, unemployment being low, people don't feel that. They feel the pain. Our retired people. This district has a lot of retired people. I think it's 250,000 of our constituents are retired. On Social Security, Medicare, Social Security is not keeping up with the cost of living. They can't afford. So unless we fix these issues, the stock market, the unemployment, it's not going to matter because people can't afford what they need to live daily.
You both have mentioned the deficit, and so I'd like to know how high a priority, Ms. George, let me start with you, how high a priority is that for you? And when you go to Congress, how do you convince other members of Congress who may have said the same thing? Mr. Bakke referred to Mr. Schweikert. He's said many times that that's a high priority for him, yet we continue to see the deficit rise. How would you be able to go there and convince people that this is an important thing?
Well, I think we all know it's an important thing, right? I mean, like inflation, it's just going up every day. Yeah, the deficit is a big problem, and it's interesting that the congressman voted to raise the debt ceiling. I mean, we know that when we print more money, inflation goes up. So again, I just go back to common sense. I'm not an actuarial accountant, but I can tell you that when you spend more money than you take in, you've got a problem. And so we need people in Washington that can make common sense decisions. I think the government, I know I worked there for 23 years, we overcomplicate things, and we don't need to do that. We need people in Washington that are better stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And stop wasting it. Stop frivolously sending it all over the world. To me, it's just common sense.
I just want to add on to this. We look at this race. I'm a businessman. I run business. I run a division of a healthcare company right now. I've owned startups. I've been with other startups. I mentor in the startup world. If we look at what it's going to take to fix, we need to get business people involved in D.C. The more and more we bring in lawyers and politicians that have been their life, government people, they don't know how to solve the problems. They don't have a vested interest in making things better like we do in the business world. For many of us, that if we don't take care of the money in the business world, we're going to fail. And that is one of the things that we really need to focus on. I look at it, I'm a businessman, I've run business, I've been responsible for P&L. David Schweikert claims to, but as we go back, as Ms. George mentioned, David's failed us miserably when it comes to managing the budget and getting things done. I will tell you, one of the reasons he's failed miserably, he cannot get people to work together. He was pulled off panels back 10 years ago. They pulled him off all of his committees because he caused too much problem. I talked to people in D.C. I talked to some of the lobbyists that go back. They don't have good things to say about Schweikert and actually being able to work with other people to get done. That is something that I would bring to the table. It's my business experience. I know how to bring people together. I know how to unite people to get things done, especially people who have different views.
Well, I would like to follow up on that because this is a district that has a slight Republican advantage, but we also know that in Maricopa County, we're seeing about a third of our registered voters are unaffiliated. Yeah. They may be lapsed conservatives, lapsed liberals, however we want to define that. But when you talk about bringing people together, you're talking about people who, can you try to find common ground with those on the other side of the aisle?
Yeah, I can. And you know, when we fight for what we believe in, and that's what we need to do, is we need to be ready to fight for what we believe in, but understand that other people are fighting as well for what they believe in. We stick to our principles, but then we negotiate. This is what we do in business. We go into a negotiation, we want this, they want that, and we work together for common. We do not give up what's important to us, but we make sure that we give each side an opportunity. This is one of the things that's missing in D.C. right now. You have the right, you have the left. They fight. It's all political talking points. We have extremist views that don't want to work together. Independents, you bring up a great point. There's more independents in this district than Democrats. Most of those independents, when I talk to them, are what I would call, old-time Republicans that have just left the Republican Party. They're looking for something in the middle. They're looking for someone that's moderate. Remind you, for all you independents out there, in this primary, you will not be sent a ballot, but if you go and request it, you can get a ballot to vote in the Republican or the Democratic primary. That's one of the important things that we forget, and this is how we got to work together, is independents, you need to get your voice heard and have it heard in this election.
Ms. George, for some, moderate's a dirty word these days, but I want to have you follow up on what Mr. Bakke said. But also, do you think it's important to reach across the aisle, at least on certain issues?
Oh, absolutely. I think we always need to reach across the aisle. That's in my law enforcement career and in the corporate sector, you can't get anything done unless you know how to talk to people and work with people from all different walks of life and background. I mean, I've interviewed thousands of people, gotten hundreds of confessions, worked with many witnesses, women and children have been victimized. You have to know how to talk to people. So absolutely. And I agree with Mr. Bakke. The congressman's reputation in D.C. is not good. He's known to not work well across the aisle. But one thing I do want to add that I will disagree with Mr. Bakke on is that a government employee like myself, a former government employee, will be effective in Washington because I know where the problems are. I know where the waste, fraud, and abuse is. I know what happens at the end of every fiscal year when the government tries to spend the money, because if they don't spend it, then they don't get it funded in the next fiscal year. So I'm going to beg to differ with you on that. A government employee, a retired government employee, will be effective in Washington because we know how things work and we know how to fix things.
Would you like a quick follow there?
I will just, I mean, it's, when you say you know how to fix things coming from the government, I think it was Ronald Reagan who was famous for what are the scariest words in the English language? I'm with the government and I'm here to help.
Yes, no, good point.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, one other, though we've touched on a lot of different issues, Mr. Bakke, let me ask a final economy question for you. Do you believe that the CHIPS Act, for example, or the Inflation Reduction Act as it was called, has led to increased prosperity in Arizona? Some would say that the expansion of Intel, TSMC coming here, are signs that that is true. Would you agree or disagree with that?
So, the CHIP Act goes beyond just the economic development. It's a national security issue. For those that don't understand what this is, TSMC produces 95% of these chips that we use in artificial intelligence. Every one of your phones, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, has a chip produced by TSMC in Taiwan. China has made it clear that it's not a matter of if they invade, it's a matter of when they invade China. If without the CHIPS Act, we would not have TSMC building their advanced fabs. I worked for 10 years in the semiconductor business. I was there in Taiwan. I've been to TSMC. I've been to the other facilities. When China attacks Taiwan, those facilities will be what they call bricked. The manufacturers of the equipment have already made it clear. The Taiwanese government's made it clear. That'll wipe out 95% of our advanced chips if we don't have things. The CHIPS Act is a wise financial investment, not only in the local economy, because it does allow Intel, TSMC, Amkor, Microchip, and other companies to build fabs and back-end facilities here. but it also allows us to bring those advanced nodes over here so that, again, when China attacks, we don't lose out on all of those chips.
Okay.
It's key. And you asked about the Inflation Reduction Act. That was the funniest name for an act that actually drove more inflation. I mean, Ms. George and I both agree on this, is that you spend more money, you're going to get inflation. How much money do they drop? Billions and billions and billions of dollars. All it does is cause inflation. So that's the other thing in D.C. is the lack of honesty about what a bill really does. We need to be honest. Don't call it an Inflation Reduction Act when you're spending money that just drives things up.
Okay. Ms. George, on the CHIPS Act and Inflation Reduction Act, your thoughts?
I agree. Great name, Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah, it didn't reduce anything. Yeah, the CHIPS Act, yes, it absolutely did bring prosperity to Arizona and to the people here, bring jobs. But one thing I want to point out that we don't talk about is the counterintelligence, my background, and the counterintelligence concern that the factory it does, cause me. The Chinese, especially the Chinese that are coming across the border in droves, I'm telling you right now that those folks that are working at that factory and those factories that are being built here, we need to think about the counterintelligence issues that it's going to drive because the Chinese absolutely would love to get their hands on that sensitive technology, as I'm sure you're well aware. And I don't know that we have the resources right now to track that threat, and I'm concerned with that. So that's something that we need to think about in the future. So yes, it absolutely brings prosperity to Arizona, but we need to remember that that also presents other issues that law enforcement, our intel community will have to be taken care of.
Ms. George, let me stay with you on this next question. So if in fact, as Mr. Bakke brought up, that if China decides to invade Taiwan, we've seen Russia invade Ukraine, how much involvement should the U.S. have on foreign soil when it comes to either protecting our own interests or helping allies?
Well, we have to support our allies. I mean, that's a given. That's why we are allies. How much? I mean, it's debatable. I think the money that we're sending to Ukraine needs to stop. In the beginning, I think helping them out was a good idea, but I think we've gone too far. I know that they're talking right now about a 10-year projection. I read yesterday that NATO is talking about getting paths for U.S. troops to go to the front lines to fight. I mean, this has to stop. It really does. I mean, we've gone too far with this. We didn't agree, we the people didn't vote on this. We didn't agree to continue sending money to Ukraine, over $165 billion at this point. We could use that money here in Arizona, here in CD1.
Mr. Bakke, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we need to divide Taiwan, Ukraine, and even Israel into different categories. But the first thing I just want to be clear on is with allies, NATO. We would need to support NATO. We have an agreement with them, and we will not leave NATO, and we need to be there. Israel, same thing. They are our biggest ally in the Middle East. We need to unequivocally support Israel and everything they've done. The difference between Israel and Ukraine is there's an end game in Israel. They have a goal, and they're on a mission to accomplish it. In Ukraine, right now, there is no goal. It's a stalemate. The Biden administration failed 2 years ago, when this all began, to give Ukraine the weapons they needed to succeed. They were afraid of Russia. They were afraid of escalating it, and as you've seen, none of that proved true. Russia did not have a good military. They didn't have any good ways to run the military. If we had given them the weapons 2 years ago that they needed, it'd be a different story. Now we just sent $60 billion. There's no end game. They're going to send another $60 billion later this year with no end game. If we're going to send money to Ukraine, we need to know what the end game is, and we need to have a clear plan. Taiwan is an ally, not only of us, but strategically for the world. We have a partnership with them that we need to protect them, and we will protect them, and we need to continue providing stuff to Taiwan.
Okay. Ms. George, let me start with you on this one. Is there a nation or an unaffiliated entity, perhaps a terrorist group, that you think is the biggest threat to the U.S.?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. China is definitely a threat to the U.S. I think they're one of our biggest threats. I mean, Director Chris Wray said recently that we need to be very concerned about the cyber threat that the Chinese pose. I mean, that's been going on for a while, so it's not new, but it's just now surfacing, which again, I go back to why are our borders open and why are we allowing all these Chinese nationals to flow over our borders? And one thing I'd like to remind people that the Chinese, they're surveilled 24/7, and it's really sad what the conditions that they're living under. But what I'm very concerned with is the Chinese people, the ones that are leaving and coming here. China knows this is happening, and mark my words, if they were concerned about this or they had a problem with it, the ambassador would be over at the State Department today bringing that up and demanding that we send those people home. And I'd like all of you listening and watching right now to ask yourself why that's not happening. That's what I'm concerned about from a national security and a law enforcement perspective.
Mr. Bakke?
Yeah, I'll agree with Ms. George on some of that. China is a threat. When it comes to our biggest threat, it's going to be cyber. And the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and even the Russians have proven very good at attacking infrastructure. These things happen all the time. I know when talking with people in the cybersecurity world, I know quite a few people that are heavily involved and doing stuff to protect our infrastructure. They are working to get into our grid. They know that if they can shut our grid down, they can take this country and within 24 hours create absolute chaos in this district. When power goes out, we delay a debate. As happened for us here. But when power goes out, that's what happens. But when the whole grid goes down, stoplights quit working, grocery stores quit working, they can't process claims, it won't take long before chaos happens. So it's not just one country, it's all of the cyber attacks I'm really concerned about. I also am concerned about what's coming across the border. China's one, but we look at a lot of what's happening from the Middle East and from some of the African countries and even down in the South. From Chile, we have gangs that are coming into America that are robbing our homes during dinner time. Part of the Visa Waiver program. We don't talk about it. David Schweikert's done nothing about it. He knows about it. The sad thing is No-Show Dave didn't show up at the Scottsdale meeting that the Scottsdale police had to discuss it. I was there. I talked to the police. I heard what was going on, and I talked to the people. These are the things that are the threat to our economy. We have the global threats, we have the cyber threats, but we also have the local threats that we need to take care of. We need to get someone in D.C. that knows how to deal with issues and can work with other people to get done.
Ms. George, clearly you both want to talk about the border, so I will hold off no longer. I will let the two of you dive in on this. Would you define what's going on at our southern border as a crisis?
1,000%. But I'd like to add, if I can, to what Mr. Bakke just said. I've been knocking on doors for several months now, and what am I hearing over and over again? That the sitting congressman is not present. He's nowhere to be seen. The only time we hear from him is when it's election time. That's what I hear over and over again. And yes, he's one person, one vote. I understand that. But why hasn't he been at the border? Why wasn't he at the border when the other congressmen came down for their meeting? 2 meetings now, I believe. He's nowhere to be seen. So we need someone in Washington that takes our national security and our border security seriously, and I do. I know how devastating this could be to us. And to Mr. Bakke's point, our grid. They've been planning an attack on our grid for decades now. This is not new, but the fact that we've opened our doors to them, it just makes it easier for them to come across. So do I think that the border is in a crisis? You better believe I do. It's a major crisis. It's not just the Chinese. Yes, it's the Middle Eastern, it's the African countries. It's those folks that aren't assimilating properly into our country. And listen, we all have good hearts. Americans, we're good people. We want to help others, right? But the bottom line is we can't help the world. We have to have a process at the border. We have processes, we have laws on the books, but this administration, this feckless leadership has refused to enforce the laws on the books. That has to happen. Because who are we going to blame when something happens and when there's a terrorist attack in this country? And I'm going to tell you it's not if, it's when. They are setting up cells around this country, and there's just no doubt about it. There are people that want to cause us harm, and we better start taking this seriously and have fighters in Washington that will do this for the people and for Arizona.
Mr. Bakke, border crisis?
Oh, the border is a catastrophe. It's an invasion. 9.5, 10 million people have come across our borders in the last 4 years. They're living in our country. We don't know where they are. We have over 3 million asylum claims that need to be processed. There is no way to get through those in the next 10 years. We don't have enough judges. But one of the things we don't talk about is the asylum process. Right now, we do need to shut down the border. We need physical barriers, and we need to make everyone go through port of entries. But with the asylum process, the law says if you make it to, the only way you can claim asylum is if you go to a port of entry or you're on American soil. So everyone that comes across the border, they are now on American soil, they can claim for asylum. We need someone in D.C. that will propose the law and get it passed that will change the asylum law. My proposal is we stop that asylum on our border, and we require you to do it in your own country, or if your country's not safe, in a neighboring country. But we also have this great technology called a smartphone. And people say, well, they don't have smartphones. Well, if you watch Bill Malusian's report this morning from Fox News, he was interviewing people coming from all over the world. Every single one of them had a new smartphone. In fact, they have video of them taking pictures on the border with their smartphones and sending it to their family. So we can revise our asylum system so that way no longer can you claim it here. You have to claim it in your home country. You can do it virtually on a smartphone. So we go back to what I want to go back on the border. It is a crisis. It's an invasion. We need to do something about it. Physical barriers, technology barriers, change the asylum process, as well as hire more asylum judges and move it from judges to clerks or administrative people where they can actually hear the claim and get things done. We don't need to wait 10 years to have these people's claims heard.
Ms. George, the one question I ask as a follow-up, though, is outgoing Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema brought together a bipartisan group, and part of that was tightening our asylum laws to the tightest they've ever been in history, at least in modern history. And yet that was turned away, in part because of the power of former President Trump, many have said. Was that a mistake? Would that have actually helped the problem? And should, in this case, former President Trump have allowed the legislation to go through? I say allowed in quotes.
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, what about H.R. 2? H.R. 2 was sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk for whatever a year now, and I think that bill was much stronger. And I would ask you, why did that sit on Chuck Schumer's desk? And when we say it was bipartisan, I think most of the congressmen that we heard said that they were never a part of the process, and the senators, they were kept in the dark until the very last minute. Washington shouldn't work that way. The people in Washington are sent there to work for us. We elect them. That's what we're doing here tonight, is we want to be your elected representative in Washington. And when I'm there, I'm going to do the will of the people. I'm going to do what you sent me there to do. And when you isolate people, senators and congressmen, from the process, that doesn't make any sense. So we say it's bipartisan, but quite honestly, I would beg to differ, and I would think that if you ask many of the senators and congressmen in Washington, they would disagree with that. What President Trump did or didn't influence, I don't know. But I'd like to go back just 1 minute to the immigration/border issues. I mean, these are two separate things, right? Immigration, that's been a problem that's been kicked down the decade after decade, kicked down the road. That needs to be fixed. We absolutely need to fix that. We need to tighten up the time period, shorten the process, fix that. The border, completely separate. Asylum is supposed to be claimed in the first country you set foot in. So when you come up through the Darien Gap, when you take a plane, a train, an automobile, and you get over into the U.S. side, that's not how the asylum process works. So if we were enforcing the laws in the books and actually following Title VIII, how it's meant to be followed and how it's written, then we wouldn't be in the position that we're in. But we have an administration who refuses to allow our Border Patrol men and women who are tired of making sandwiches and changing diapers. They refuse to let them enforce the laws in the books. And I can tell you that when I'm in Washington, I'm going to fight for you, law enforcement that's out there listening right now. I'm going to make sure you have the tools and the ability that you need to get your job done, because I know when you swore that oath to the Constitution, that's all you want to do, is you want to protect this country, stop the fentanyl, stop the child sex trafficking.
Mr. Bakke, I'd like to get into a little bit more of how you would want to solve the border security issue versus the immigration issue. Those are two different things. But there has been talk for years, the so-called Gang of Eight, when President George W. Bush was in office. Some Republicans, some Democrats got together on a so-called comprehensive immigration plan. Yeah. Do you think something like that is possible, or does it have to be piecemeal? Does it have to be border security separate, immigration separate?
Well, there's a lot to unpack.
Yes, there are a lot of questions in there.
I think there's like 10 questions in that one.
Yes.
So let's start with the bipartisan bill part. There was not a bipartisan bill that was brought up a vote. That was part of a bigger omnibus spending bill that included $60 billion for Ukraine. That's why that vote went down. Also, the border part of that bill didn't solve any problems. It allowed 5,000 people to come across the border every day before they did anything. After 270 days of shutting down the border, which they would do, which means basically limiting to 5,000, for the rest of the year, you could have unlimited people that came in. They don't talk about that. All it would mean is it sounds like we're doing something, but we're really not doing anything. The same number of people are going to come in as were coming in before. If you look at the vote on that bill, more Democrats voted against that bill than Republicans supported it. So when we talk about bipartisan support, it went down in a bipartisan flame as well. So let's go back to some of the other things, immigration and the border. They are two separate but similar things, is we need to have a strong border because with the strong border, keeps people out and keeps people that should not be coming in from coming in. So we need to revise our immigration system. I've got a good friend, Sue, who is Canadian, and she has battled for 7 years to be able to have the ability to stay here permanently. She runs a company. She's an absolutely brilliant speaker, and she does great things in our ecosystem, not only for startup, for women, and other things. Why is she battling for 7+ years to get the ability to stay permanently when we allow those who come across the border not to have it? This is not a story that's just Sue. I've got other friends. I've talked to other people. I've talked to a waiter in Miami, Cuban, that came across. He told me the same story. He's Cuban. And he goes, why am I going through all of this?
Briefly, sir, please.
When the border is open to everyone else.
Ms. George, do you want to have a quick follow-up on?
Yeah. I'd like to. I find the cell phones, like Mr. Bakke mentioned earlier, I mean, all these things that we're giving to people coming into the country illegally, that's the problem that we, the people, have with it. I mean, my understanding is we're giving $3,800 and some odd livable wage, federal assistance to some of these folks, yet the average Social Security check to our seniors is $1,200. How is that acceptable in the United States of America? The men and women that have paid into this system over the decades and decades of their hard work and their taxpayer dollars, we're not giving them $3,800 a month. I can tell you that because I have family members that aren't getting that. That's not right. That has to stop. I mean, we have illegals that we're putting up in New York hotels. You know, why is this happening? You know, it's again, the humanitarian thing, we want to help people, but there is an asylee process. We have to stay with that. We have to enforce Title VIII as it's written on the books. If we want to reform it, then in Congress we do that. But in the meantime, we enforce the laws on the books and we follow the asylee process as it is written.
Okay. Mr. Bakke, let's change the topic somewhat to former President Trump. As Ms. George referred to earlier in this debate, there was a recent court decision that found former President Trump guilty on 34 of 34 counts. How much do you support former President Trump, and did that affect your feeling of support for him at all?
Let's talk about the trial. Liberals, Democrats, independent Republicans that I talk to, for the most part, all are saying the same thing. That was a politically motivated sham trial. To go through this whole trial on 34 charges that were the same and not find out what you're really being charged with, that elevated until the closing statements where you don't have anything to respond, come on, that shouldn't happen. That violates so many parts of the Constitution. It was a sham, and it should never have happened. It will get overturned on appeal, and Trump will have those convictions exonerated. Does it change my support for Trump? No. We have a decision to make in this country. We have two different views for the presidential. We have one that's anti-gun. We have one that'll destroy and continue destroying our economy. We have one that is proven to allow millions of people to come across our border illegally that are threats not only to our security, but to our economic stability and our nation as a whole. Or we have Donald Trump, who will fight for the rights for us from the Second Amendment. He will secure the border. And when he was in office, we had a thriving economy. Unemployment was down the lowest it had ever been. Look at the minority working groups, Black, Hispanics. They had the lowest unemployment ever. If you look at what's going on now, when you see the interviews in our inner cities, all of them are saying, with Biden, I got nothing. With Trump, I had something. And so it doesn't change my support. And I think that we're going to see Trump get reelected. And for those who don't like Trump or his views, I ask you to take those aside and do what I do and say, what is the best thing for the country? We may not like always what he does or what he says, but his policies had a positive impact. They did secure the country. And mind you, we talked about Ukraine and Israel. There were no wars going on when Trump was there. Russia didn't do things like that, and China won't either.
Ms. George, let's talk first about the trial, because you alluded to it early in this debate. And then, does it affect your support for President Trump in any way, former President Trump in any way?
No, not even close. And everything that Mr. Bakke said, I agree with 100%. I support Donald Trump, and I believe he will be the next president of this country. He has my utmost and full support. You know, what we saw in that courtroom was abhorrent. You know, the lack of ethics and, quite honestly, the way it was run, I mean, from the judge to the daughter, I mean, I'm sure we've all listened and read what happened in that trial. It's shameful. And what I'm a little tired of is hearing, this is not direct attack at Mr. Bakke, but just in general, you know, on the media, is that it'll be appealed and he'll win under appeal. I'm kind of tired of hearing that because we shouldn't be having to talk about going to appeal. It shouldn't even have gotten to the point it got to. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running, is because this needs to stop. The corruption needs to stop. And I'm so disappointed in what I'm seeing in our judicial system and in our DOJ. And we need people in Washington with experience and that can get on these committees to help put a stop to this. No, it doesn't change my opinion whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I think he was very strong in the way he stood his ground throughout the trial. I think he did a good job, and he has my utmost and full support.
Is there anything that would affect your support, Mr. Bakke, first of all? If there was some other trial not related to this particular so-called hush money
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. That's what you're asking for, some hypothetical of something that might happen someday down the future. Okay. Not going to get into it. The one thing I do want to clarify, and Ms. George has mentioned this, is the DOJ in this trial. Well, this was not a federal trial. That's right. This was the New York DA Alvin Bragg, who ran his political campaign to get into office on the fact that he would go after Trump. No matter what it took, he would take it down. I don't care what political persuasion you are. When we have politicians whose sole purpose in running is clearly expressed in their platform that they're going to go after one particular person, we should not have them in office, and we should be ashamed. These are the things that happen in Russia, in third world countries. China does this. It should not be happening here in the USA. We need to make sure that our politicians are focused on what's best for us, for our economy, and not going after people because of who they are and what their views are. There's the old saying that came out of Nazi Germany: they came for the Jews, or these people, those people, and the Jews, and no one was there for me. That's what's happening, and we got to be careful about that in this country. The more we let them go after people, they will continue down the pipe, and eventually they will get to you. And if we don't stop it now, there will be no one there to defend you. We need to make sure that we don't let these things happen.
No, I agree 100%. And I just want to add, the reason why I mentioned DOJ was because Matthew Colangelo, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, was a former DOJ prosecutor, and he ended up in Bragg's office. And I think that's somewhat coincidental. So that's why I mentioned the DOJ.
I would ask one brief follow-up, Mr. Bakke. We certainly have a Democrat in the White House right now with his appointees, or at least his attorney general appointed in the DOJ. Is there a concern you have that this is becoming a both sides issue, though? If Republicans again take the White House, will they in fact make it a political payback then? And is this just a never-ending cycle?
You know, it's the pendulum, and it's going to swing. And right now the Democrats are in control. The DOJ's got the Democrats in control, and they're coming after Republicans. So the question is, when the Republicans get in, is there anything wrong with the Republicans going after the Democrats? I don't think it should happen, because I don't think it should be happening now. But these are the consequences of the action of our political leaders. Again, you look at David Schweikert, no-show Schweikert. He's not doing anything to talk about these issues. He's not taking a stance on any of this. He has no courage to handle what needs to happen in D.C., because we need a congressman that will stand up and fight and say, these things are not acceptable in our government. We don't need government people saying what we need to do. We need people from the community. We need business people to rise up and say, hey, this is in impact all of us. We got to stop it now. New York, they talk now. If you look at some of the people that are big business leaders in New York, they're talking about pulling their businesses out of New York because they don't want to deal with this corrupt political system. Same thing with the DOJ. We have people that are moving money around to avoid these sham investigations. The FBI has gone after people in the Biden administration, whether it's Trump, whether it's Giuliani, and again, whether you like him or not, or many, many other people that have conservative leanings. This is the FBI. We're supposed to trust the FBI. But there are a few people that are not good with the FBI, and unfortunately, it has tarnished the whole FBI. I would say bringing someone into D.C. that's been there in the FBI, all right, maybe knows what is going on, but you need someone that's got the will to fight, that has proven the will to fight in the community and knows how to get things done in order to affect change in D.C.
Ms. George, though, is it a broken system on both sides at this point?
Yeah, it's definitely a broken system, and I knew that was coming. Listen, I get it, and I say this all the time when I'm speaking. I mean, think about this. I spent 23 years in this organization. I love the FBI and the work that I did, saving children from being sex trafficked, arresting drug dealers who were bringing drugs into our country that were killing people. I did great work, and I'm proud of the men and women I stood shoulder to shoulder with. We did amazing work, but I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in the decisions that have been made. It's not the agents, it's not the street agent, it's not the professional support employees, it's the leadership. Under Chris Wray's leadership, and Comey's, to be quite honest, the FBI has made some bad decisions. And I'm going to agree with you on that. But who better to send to Washington than a retired government employee, an FBI agent who knows how to fix things, who knows how it should be done the right way, and who wants to go to Washington to fix it. That's exactly why I'm running, is I want to fix this. It needs to be fixed. But I also want to answer, is it a problem on both sides? It's absolutely a problem on both sides. And I do not want to go to Washington and be the attack dog and get the Democrats. We have to get away from that. We can learn to agree to disagree and be grown-ups. We're paying these people way too much money to argue on these committees. I mean, I've seen some witnesses sitting there, and it's shameful. They don't even ask the witness what they're there for. Instead, they use it as their 30 seconds or 3 minutes to pontificate. That needs to stop. The American people are tired of it. I'm tired of it, and that's why I'm running. That's why I want to go to Washington to fix this. I can get along with people on the other side. Absolutely, we can agree to disagree. Let's get back to the Reagan Tip O'Neill days. Let's get there. We can do that with better people in Washington.
Brief follow-up, Mr. Bakke?
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick question. You've talked about being in the FBI and all of the stuff you've done and that you can fix the problems. So with 23 years in the FBI, I'm assuming you were a supervising agent at some point. What things did you do? Give us an example of how you were able to fix something within the FBI.
I didn't realize you were moderating this debate, but, well, let's see. Now that you ask me, there's a lot of things that I did. You know, when you have a situation, you make decisions based on the situation, and you make common sense decisions to help improve. If something needs fixing, you fix it, and that's what I'm good at. I'm good at fixing things. Like you say, you're a fixer. Well, believe it or not, there's some government employees out there that are good fixers, too. The government doesn't do everything right. Trust me on that. And we always wanted to make it more efficient and more effective, and I was good at that, and I did that.
Okay, Ms. George, let's move on to another huge topic we haven't touched on yet, and that is abortion. Would you want to leave it to the states to decide? Would you support any sort of federal codification, or is there some sort of restriction you would place on abortion at this point?
Listen, I'm 100% pro-life, and no, I think this is a state rights issue, and that's where it needs to stay. Roe was settled. It's in the state's hands, and that's where it needs to stay. And that's really the bottom line for me.
Okay. Mr. Bakke on that?
Yeah, and I think this is where we're going to have a disagreement again on issues. Is I believe, you know, if we look at what happened in the states' rights, this is a state right. The Constitution's clear that it belongs, the Supreme Court said, and we need to have it in the states. But the difference that we're going to have is there's a legal and there's a personal issue. As I talk to people in the district, 75 to 80% of people believe that a woman should have a right to an abortion. The limits on that go from anything from 15 weeks to gestation or to viability. Sorry about that. I believe that the Arizona law of 15 weeks with protection of the right for the mother, or the life of the mother, is what we need to have on the books. That is the law that's there, and that's what we need to do. If it came up to Congress, I don't think it's Congress's right to do that. However, we do have the ability to add things to the Constitution, and I think that we need to look at potentially adding a 15-week abortion rule or amendment to the Constitution. That is something that makes sense. But with all of that said, abortion is a traumatic event. I talk to a lot of women that have had abortions. They don't just go away. We as a society need to give them the opportunity for the counseling, the support that they need. People that I've talked to that tell me, yeah, I've had an abortion. When was it? 30 years ago. What do you think? I still think about it. It's not an easy thing. And a lot of times we forget that on the Christian right, that when someone has an abortion, we may not agree with it, but we still need to be there for them and give support. I would encourage us in both federal and state and local to provide more money to not only to stop providing all this money to the Planned Parenthoods, but give it to some of the pro-life organizations, because they have phenomenal counseling programs that allow couples to come together. It's interesting when you talk to the pro-life groups, and I've had these conversations with their counselors. You have Jose and Sophia, who she's having a baby. They come in to talk about an abortion. Well, she's going to have the abortion because she thinks he wants her to have it. He doesn't want to tell her what to do. In the end, they both want to keep the baby, but they don't talk to each other. I know this is surprising that couples don't talk, but part of what needs to happen is we need to give the counseling. In Sweden, in Germany, and a lot of other European countries that are more liberal than we are, they do require the counseling, and I think that's something important, not only pre-abortion, but post-abortion, to make sure we do protect women's health.
Ms. George, I would like to have your thoughts.
I agree with all those. I mean, I think counseling and offering that assistance to the men and women that are going through this process together, because it should be, when they're pregnant, it should be something they're going through together. But I'm going to stick with, we're a constitutional republic, and this needs to stay with the states, because what's next? Gun rights? How we run our elections? I mean, this needs to stay in the states' hands, and I'm standing with that. But my job in Congress will not be, to pass a federal abortion ban. My job will be two things. It will be to make sure no more taxpayer dollars go to fund abortions, whether it be in the United States of America or outside our borders. And secondarily, harsher punishments for men that inflict this terrible thing on women and young girls, rape, incest, molestation. That needs to stop. And we need people in Washington that have actually worked with these women and children who've been victimized and know what it's like for them, that can help advocate for them. And that's what I plan to do in Washington.
You each have about 30 seconds to answer this question. In some ways, you've already answered it. Mr. Bakke, let me start with you. If David Schweikert were here, what's the first thing you'd want to say to him face to face?
Thank you for finally showing up. No-show Dave. He doesn't show up for us. 14 years. What's he done? Nothing. Right now, if you look at what Schweikert is doing, he's hiding, just like Biden. So if I was here, I would say, why are you hiding like Biden? And quit being no-show Dave. We want to see you in the district, and we want to get things done.
Ms. George, about 30 seconds.
That was great. I agree with you. Where are you? And, why are you not fighting for us? Even if you can't get something done because you're one person, one vote, why aren't you out there telling us, explaining things to us, fighting for us, making us at least believe and know that you are there representing our best interests? You're not doing that, Congressman. I released a statement about President Trump last week, and every day I put it out again. Your constituents are still waiting for you to release a statement on what happened to President Trump last week. We're waiting.
I lied. We have about 5 seconds. I want a very quick answer on this. Has either one of you met with David Schweikert one-on-one? Robert Bakke?
I've tried, but no.
Okay. Ms. George?
I've not met with him, but I've met him. Yes, I've been at several events with him where I've met him and spoken to him, yes.
Yeah, I've met him like that, but not. I've tried to meet with him personally, but no.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think he has a desire to meet with either of us right now.
No. At least not during this debate.
I don't think so.
And now it's time for our closing statements. Each of you have 1 minute. Mr. Bakke?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. George. I appreciate your time. Steve, Clean Elections, and you, the voters sitting at home or on your mobile devices or wherever you are watching this debate. David Schweikert has spent the last 14 years representing us in D.C. and getting nothing done. If he's on the ballot in November, the Democrats have already made it clear they're going to win. David Schweikert will lose this district in November if he's on the ballot. I'm an honest businessman. I've got a track record of getting things done. I've run global businesses. I've dealt in Mexico. I've dealt in Taiwan. I know how to solve problems. And if you look at the three of us on the stage, with my views on abortion, on the economy, and understanding how things work in the real world and being a businessman, I'm the only one of the three of us that will win in November. Robert Bakke, I'm asking for your vote because we need to start getting things done. Reach me at Bakke2024.com. I thank you for your support.
Ms. George, you have the next closing statement, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you, Clean Elections, for this wonderful opportunity. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Robert, for this debate. I think I've agreed with you more than I expected to tonight. But yes, Americans have lost faith in the media, in our government, and in our courts. And I want to go to Washington to help reinstill that faith in America and in these systems. We need that. God, family, country, and the rule of law. That's who I am to the core. I want to go to Washington and fight for you, Arizona, and the constituents in CD1. I'm Kim George, KimGeorgeforArizona.com. Please go to my site, learn how to get involved, donate so I can help get my message out. God bless our troops, God bless our first responders, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Ms. George, Mr. Bakke, thank you both very much for participating in this debate. Good conversation. We appreciate it. This wraps today's debate with the Republican candidates for Arizona Congressional District 1. As a reminder, the Arizona primary election is on July 30th, and early voting starts July 3rd. All registered voters can participate in the primary, including independents. There are a lot of offices up for election this year, so we'll keep hosting debates through the summer and fall. Head to azmedia.org to see a list of every local media partner, plus upcoming debates, and where you can find them on TV, radio, and digital platforms. You can also see the full debate schedule, learn more about clean elections, and submit questions for future debates by going to azcleanelections.gov. On behalf of our partners at Clean Elections, the Arizona Media Association, Reister, and Bitfire Studios, thanks for watching.